assessed, they can cause harm to participants or to the beneficiaries. You can also have violence that is caused by the persons who are leading the program or coaches. Or your participants could also be experiencing violence that is without your organization, most likely within your communities. And as an institution, you have the responsibility to support these participants. And that said, I'll just focus and narrow down on children. The 2019 Violence Against Children Survey report highlights that nearly half of females and more than half of males have experienced childhood violence in Kenya. And that's the data that we are working with to inform why we should care about safeguarding in sport, because violence within this country, and it could be in every sector, exists. It exists among children, and that's where we should focus our strength, because these are the most vulnerable. And then it also exists when we are speaking about adults and young persons. So, defining safeguarding. In the video we've spoken about safeguarding, but I just would like us to differentiate between protection and safeguarding, because these two terms are very synonymous. And a lot of the people who are designing programs for children, programs for young people, they might confuse these two. And they're like, are we protecting or are we safeguarding? So I just want us to really understand the difference between these two, so that as we are living here, as a person, you either as an athlete, you know what are your rights when we are talking about safeguarding, and what are your rights when you're talking about protection. Sawa sawa. So child protection or protection per se involves various approaches to preventing children from being harmed and responding effectively when such incidences occur. And these ones are entrenched in various policies that we have in this country. We have the Children's Act, we have the Sexual Offences Act, we have multiple documents in this country that directly responds to protection of children or protection of anyone. Sawa sawa. So when we are talking about protection, it means that these are frameworks that exist within this country. And they're the ones that, while you are implementing safeguarding, you might at some point invoke to respond to some of the issues, or might inform how you even develop your safeguarding policy. Because your safeguarding policy should be anchored on some of the protection guidelines that exist. And what is safeguarding? So safeguarding is very, I would say, personal to an institution. Let's say, like, I know KAS has a safeguarding policy. So what does that mean, for example, KAS? It means these are guidelines developed by KAS, but they should not contravene the protection policies that have been set by the main framework. The Children's Act, they should not be in contravention with the Sexual Offences Act, they should not be in contravention with the other major acts, or I would say, constitutional framework, national, international, that Kenya has signed to. So they have to be within that. So as KAS sits down, KAS is looking at their programs, it's looking at their people, it's looking at their environment, who they engage with, I would say their ecosystem, and therefore as it's creating the safeguarding policy, it is to guide KAS staff and the people that come into contact with KAS, so that while they are operating, they are not causing harm to children. I would like you to hold that thought. It is your internal measure as an institution that you put in place. Whether you are, every institution in this country should have a safeguarding policy. From media to a school should have a safeguarding policy. Because you interact with people, And therefore, you should have measures to ensure that as you interact with these people, what are the risks that these people may come into contact with based on what you're doing? Like as we're running this conference, there are a number of risks, and therefore KAS, through its safeguarding policy, should ensure that when it comes to conferences, this is how we ensure that our participants of conferences are not harmed or are not put at risk. And if the risks happen, how do we mitigate that risk? Si tumeelewana hapo? I hope that is clear. So, in terms of the difference, so safeguarding is broader than child protection because it is very proactive. It means you're looking at everything that exists within your environment to make sure that you're looking at actors. You know, it's not just focusing on sexual abuse. If sexual abuse happens, I should follow this line. But when you're looking at safeguarding, you're talking about sexual abuse, physical abuse. You're looking at coach training. You're looking at, you know, multiple things, code of conduct of people that are within your organization. When you're engaging suppliers, are they compliant with safeguarding? So we are talking about a broader environment or a broader sense beyond just protection. So I would like to use scenarios, and I would appreciate if we can engage in this conversation. Maybe I would ask you, three of you, and then I'll sample people who will tell me whether this is a safeguarding or a protection case study, right? The director of your organization has a sexual relationship with an adult volunteer. And then, while you're driving and stopped in traffic, a father is seen beating his child and is inflicting injuries on the child's head. Is that a protection? Based on what I've described, can you discuss for 1 minute, and then I'll sample people to tell us whether they think that's a safeguarding or a protection issue. Discuss more. And it could be either. Or. So I think we have a bit of sense of what we think. So who wants to try? Thank you. Every answer is correct. So don't fear to try, because it could be contextual.
Thank you very much. My name is Seth Amanfu. So we considered the first issue of the director and the adult volunteer. The first thing we realized was it's an adult volunteer. So both of them are adults, and so there's no conflict about age or anything of that sort. It's also difficult. I'm not giving you a straight answer. It's also difficult because we don't know where the influence came from. I started by saying maybe because of the power dynamics of the hierarchical system of the director and the volunteer, it could be shifted on the side of the director, but I was also made aware that it could be on the other way. So it's hard for us to, it doesn't fall under, it's hard to know where it falls because it's safeguarding. The adult component makes it difficult for us to say it's the same. If it was a teenager or younger child or something, then we could have said safeguard. So we still couldn't come to a conclusion, but I thought it's good to explain the parameters we chose to take.
Thank you so much. One more? Yeah.
Thank you. You know, the scenario you've created is like a scenario that involves two adults. And if the act was consensual, then it is not a safeguard issue, because they're adults, they can choose. Number two, the volunteer might be the one who enticed the director. Because she thinks by enticing the director, she will have a safe zone within the institution. And the director then becomes vulnerable and a victim of the volunteer. If that is the case, or no, even if it is the same gender, they can indulge in a sexual act. We see these things all over. This lady and this lady can indulge in a sexual act, but this one who is the volunteer might entice her, or her might entice her. And if it happens that it is consensual, but if the director is the victim of the volunteer, then the director needs to be safeguarded, because the volunteer might be malicious, might have a reason to want to scandalize, to take advantage of the director so that she gets away. But if it is the director who has initiated it, then the volunteer becomes somehow vulnerable, but she has a right to say no because she's an adult. But if she gives in, then it is consensual.
Thank you.
As my friend said, the gap and the edge,
the power,
it is
dynamics.
very, very narrow. The thread cannot pass through.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to try the second one, the second scenario? Then we, just one person. If not, I will say something about your comments. So why are we in that such a situation? Because we are all here and we are not guided by any policy. Imagine if I was saying, okay, you have a comment. Please give him the microphone.
I will comment on both. The first scenario to me appears to one where, as professors put, it's about consent, but I think the context in which your presentation was on policy. So what is the company, the institution, the agency's policy on relationships? And so from the relationship, if the policy of the company does not allow people to have relationship, does not allow couples to stay in the same institutions, then it's converted into policy. And so for the director and the volunteer, without looking at whether they were adults or not, does the policy allow such nature of relationship? And if you come down to a child, then it's the policy that prohibits that. And so there is need for the institutions to have a policy that educates and guides its staff on the nature of relationship. So I put it as safeguarding. The second one is a child who is at risk. It's with the father has consent on the control of the child, but then there is guidance on how much is this child being disciplined. So in the hitting and causing injury, then it goes beyond discipline. It's about protecting that child who is vulnerable.
Thank you so much. We have more facilitators in the room. Thank you so much. So if you can put us back on the slide. The first scenario, I would like to emphasize the lack of guidance in terms of how we are interpreting the scenario. Because, as we said, adults are having a relationship, right? But then we have a volunteer and a director, and we have power dynamics when it comes to relationships and how vulnerability in this relationship becomes unequal, and those are the dynamics around safeguarding that needs to be in policies for any institution. And the reason why we don't have, I would say you don't have reports in your own institution could be because this is not clarified. Because this should be clarified to the latter, so that everyone within the institution can be able to identify themselves because we know a director could be harmful, right? And we have also had a volunteer could be harmful, right? But then there's power dynamics that equalizes this whole conversation that we need to pay attention to when we are talking about safeguarding. And therefore, a policy guideline is important. I think the second scenario, you gave it a very clear shot. It is a protection issue. Because it is not your program that has caused, because you are driving as an employee of a certain institution and you witness that. That is the work of the government, right? And therefore, as a democratic citizen, you have a duty to either report it to the children's officer or to someone who knows supports this child and maybe cancel the father because maybe he doesn't know, or maybe he's acting based on rage or any, like he's influenced by something that is acting beyond limit. Let's move to the next slide. So I just want to briefly talk about the difference. Internal safeguarding, you have to have a policy within your institution that guides that. So if you do not have a policy in any of the institutions that are sitting here, I think that is the first step, right? And it is internal forecast, internal reporting systems apply, because within your institution you should have a reporting framework, right? If this incident happens, where does it move to, and to who does it move to, and for how long will this be resolved? Organization partners and associates can control the situation. Direct risk to the organization. It has direct risk to your organization, partners, programs, and its reputation. Internal systems for investigation need to be there, and disciplinary action where needed. Action is taken to strengthen internal procedures when that happens. And finally, definitely it has to fit within the state regulations. Like I said, it has, finally you have to work within the provided laws and policies. The opposite is for the child protection if it happens. Local law applies, external focus, you report externally, all children in the country, organization cannot control the situation, no direct risk to the organization, external systems investigate, and programs are designed to improve social and legal protection of children and makes referral to the state. So why should we care about safeguarding? Because safeguarding helps us to create safe spaces. When individuals feel safe, they are more likely to engage in sports and physical activities and promoting overall health and well-being. So imagine you have a very toxic environment. When children come, to practice sport, when you're training coaches, your instructors are very abusive. Those environments that are created do not enhance overall health, overall well-being, and therefore that's why we should practice safeguarding. We also protect future generations. So because we want to make sure that our athletes are in good health, they are, enjoying sport, they're always looking forward to come back. And when we do our annual survey with the girls that participate in our program, 91% of the girls say they feel safe and they want to come back. So you should always do those surveys with your athletes to just check what was the experience, especially on the sector of well-being. Don't run a program that, your athletes to tell you how they're feeling, you're analyzing that feedback and using it to improve, because they can tell you comfortable, but use them to inform strengthen how you work with the children. So it is a human rights issue, because safeguarding is just not a good to do thing. It's a human right, and we need to uphold the basic rights and dignity of every individual. It prevents harm. If you have good policies, no harm will be reported within your program or your institutions. It promotes well-being. So the good thing is that we have solutions. And these solutions have already been created for us. We have the International Safeguarding in Sport Standards. And they have frameworks, they have, you can assess yourself, you can assess your institution, and you can check even how you're progressing. And I'll just speak briefly about some of the important aspects of these frameworks. One, you first need to develop policies and procedures. You should have clear policies that outline expectation for members of the organization. If it is the staff, what are the guidelines for staff? It is for coaches, even for participants themselves. So we know there could be abuses between participants. There should be a code of conduct that they sign so that they do not abuse each other. So let it be very clear. Develop policies and guidelines. The best practice I would recommend, do not go online and copy-paste a policy and change the name of the policy and give it, title it to your organization. It is a very big risk because it does not respond to the things you do. So make sure that when you look at that, if you download something anywhere, AI is here, they give you a lot of documents and frameworks. Make sure that you contextualize it to your own organization. You sit again and do more work on it. Number two, training and awareness and communications. Make sure that when you have safeguarding guidelines, everyone knows about them. The children know about them, or your participants know, your staff know, your communities know. Because there's no need of having a safeguarding policy, and in a whole year, if I come to your organization, you don't have a single report of a safeguarding breach. It is not practical. It means you have a policy, but it's not active. Because at least we should see some report, some movement, some reports. This happened. I even myself, sometimes I report myself to the safeguarding person. I breached here. And we say document, because the reason why I tell her so that she documents is because I want us, in our next training, we make sure that we don't commit the same, or we don't breach our policy again. But it's not good practice even for me to do the breach. But sometimes, because human is to error, sometimes we breach, right? And it's always important to communicate the breach. So you can't have a policy. If I come to KAS and audit KAS, I should be able to see a list of incidents that they have recorded within their system that are related to safeguarding. If they do not have, it means their policy is not operational. Risk assessment. This is the big important something that you need to do. Risk. There's always a risk. Always look at the risks. Always try and update your risk. Your risk matrix should not read the same beginning of the year, end of the year. Ensure that you look at, if you're having an activity, you assess the risk, look at the probability of the risk. What are the other angles of a risk? The probability, what other one? Probability of the risk happening, right? And then we look at the magnitude, right? Is it going to affect more people or fewer people? Sawa sawa. So that you can rate your risk. Is it going to be more impactful or less impactful? And then you constantly check that risk. If we had more time, we could even go into how do you assess a risk? Because that is the most difficult thing to do. To identify a risk, name it properly, identify its weight it very well, make sure that you know the magnitude of the risk, and make sure that you're constantly monitoring the risk, and you know when you're going to check again on the risk. Have advice and support for your athletes. If you have a program for athletes and you don't have a counselor, you do not have a therapist, You do not have, all these things should be in your budget. That's why we are talking about safeguarding. You should have someone attached to support your athletes, or have someone outside there who you can refer your athletes to. So that when the athletes are participating in your program, when they have concerns, they know who they can go to for support and advice. Work with partners. There are so many organizations around you that are not within the sports sector, but are doing work on mental health welfare, that are doing work on pro bono legal support. Make sure that you have linkages to those organizations, so that in case you have an issue and you don't have all the expertise, we know we can't have all the expertise, that you have mapped up and you have conversations with organizations that you can always refer and ensure that the participants of your organizations get support. So if you have a live safeguarding process within your institution, we should know, like I have contact with Moving the Goalpost, I have contact with, let's say, Kelin, or in Nairobi I can say FIDA for legal support if my athlete needs legal aid. So you should know which organizations within your community can support you, and clear reporting procedures. I have spoken about that. You should have a clear pathway so that all your staff know how they need to escalate all your incidences. Safe recruitment, we have police clearance certificate, ama tunaita certificate of good conduct in Kenya, right? It's important to do the first step. We know that we don't have a very strong system for tracking offenders of abuse in Kenya, but they are working on that system so that we can always have, always have records of people that have worked within our institution that have offended. You don't want to be recruiting someone who has a police record that they have committed, or they have been alleged to abuse, right? So it's important, if it was an allegation, you should make sure that during interviews you ask an exact question. Have you? Because we say that the practical way is during your interviews you have to ask that question. Because if you hire before you ask, and this person comes and commits the offense, you have also breached, right? So you directly ask, have you been involved in any incident? So that, and they sign a form to declare that I have not breached this. So that, because you don't want to have someone within an institution that has breached in the past or in another organization. If the allegation comes back and you're like, KAS has hired someone, it becomes big news. We know that, has hired someone who has committed an offense. Regularly monitor and evaluate your standards. I'll not talk much about that. I think this is a bit of a repetition. I want us to look at barriers. I don't know how much time I have, but I need to wrap up, right? The barriers that we need to think about is the importance of safeguarding is not always recognized in our African sport context, and leading to lack of action. We dismiss it. Like this, this is a child, the coach was just trying to be like a father, you see a coach, behaving in a way that is not inappropriate, and you're not able to take action because we like dismissing. So let's not be dismissive. Let's have important understanding of our context and unpack that within our context. Poorly defined policies. We have the policies that we anchor our safeguarding policies on that are not very clear. For example, Children's Act that we just strengthened the other day, but it's important to make sure that we try and close those gaps, especially when we are defining internally. Stigma, the stigma and silence. Someone can go through abuse, but then they are fearing being stigmatized with their colleagues. So that is something that we need to think about. What is our role for all of us that are here? We need to continue with education and awareness, make sure that we continuously talk about safeguarding. There are lots of online. We know, like FIFA has the FIFA Guardians toolkit. We know KAS has a safeguarding policy. We need to do more in terms with KAS to think about developing more modules for training our participants on safeguarding. So we need to ensure that we have created a lot of training and awareness, and that's why talking to you about safeguarding is a very noble thing that KAS has done. Creating a safe culture. We must create a safe culture, ensure that our athletes are able to report incidences without feeling ashamed, without you judging them. So they should feel comfortable to come to the front and report incidences. Effective action. You should always make sure within your institution you have an effective action you take. You have to conclude any cases that have been reported to you, so that you don't, people don't say, if you go to report to that institution, they don't take any action. How many cases do they have that are unresolved or uncomplete? That brings, apathy within your participants. You don't want that to happen. My recommendation, we still have a gap. I know there are lots of researchers here. We need to research on safeguarding in sport, and why and how, if we have safeguarding, it's going to strengthen our outcomes, especially within our sporting environment. We need to strengthen and be role models, especially around mechanism in our institutions, so that if someone came to your institution, they would say, oh, we know this is a credible organization. And my recommendation here, because I know we have the Ministry of Sport, I would recommend that as part of registration of organization, we should require organization to give or to submit a safeguarding policy, and to also show us that they have a safeguarding focal point within the organization. We need to make sure that athletes and young persons are involved. So it's not just about people who are leading organizations talking about safeguarding, but everyone, including athletes, they're highly sensitized, they know the policies, and they know the reporting mechanism. Thank you. I had the last video. I don't know if you give me a chance for us to watch it. Thank you.
Participation in sport is important for everyone, especially for children and young people. Regular physical activity and sport contribute to physical, social, and emotional well-being. Kids who take part in sport for development activities learn important life skills such as communication, collaboration, and leadership skills, and are more likely to adopt a healthy lifestyle. However, it is up to each of us to ensure that everyone can participate in and enjoy sport equally, and that sport and sport for development activities offer a fun, safe, and inclusive experience for all. Children and young people, as well as athletes with physical or other disabilities, or who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, may be exploitation and harassment. We can all safeguard and promote good practices in sport and challenge the bad behaviors that are harmful to children and athletes at all levels of sport, setting an example for good conduct. So, how to get started? By speaking up. Regardless of what shape or form, each of us has a responsibility to point out or draw attention to any harmful practices that occur in sport. This can be especially true when it comes to things like sexual misconduct by teammates, coaches, or other adults. By listening, this can give a voice to those who might have experienced harm while participating in sport. Through partnerships, governments, civil society groups, and communities can collaborate to develop safeguarding policies and systems to create safe and harm-free environments that promote equal participation in sport. By informing yourself and others, educate yourself about bullying, physical or emotional harm and abuse, child grooming and trafficking, and inform others. Know what to do and who to refer to when you hear about harmful practices in sport, or how to minimize risks, be it in school, in a sports club, or anywhere else where children and athletes are exposed to harm. Play your part. Each one of us becomes the best supporter any child or vulnerable athlete could have. It is on each of us to safeguard them and ensure that everyone can participate in sport in a joyful and harm-free environment. Are you ready to play your part in safeguarding children and athletes in sport? Join the safeguarding team and take action.
Let us appreciate that one more time.
I think that video has really wrapped up the entire presentation, really. Cindy, the last one, it just puts everything in a very simple form, what we need to do, where to start from, what we should be doing now, and what should be the recommendation. I know we will have some few questions before we take the break, but I don't know, where is Mr. Kwamba? He's disappeared. She challenged us and said, if by the end of the year, that your workplace has no case from the safeguarding department, if it doesn't have even one, then your policy is not working. There goes our mkubwa wetu. Mr. Kwamba, good question. Do you have any cases of safeguarding? Tuliambiwa if at the end of the year, you do not have any person coming to the safeguarding department to report a case, then the policy is not working. Is ours working at KAS? Microphone. Let us hear whether that one is the one guiding us at KAS is working.
Good morning. Thank you, my sister. Beautiful work done there. I think, one, the academy has trained safeguarding officers. That's the first step.
Good stuff.
The academy is engaged in awareness of safeguarding. And that is why we have invited the executive director to come and present on the same. So we are already working.
We don't have cases.
We have cases, of course.
Okay.
And those cases sometimes are not good to be put public.
Okay. Okay. That's good enough. At least the policy is working.
It is.
Very good.
And we keep talking about it every time.
Thank you very much. All right. With that spirit, Professor, we'll have the plenary time. We will have, just before we take the break, I will give you a chance, right? Yeah. Okay. We will now shift the gear slightly to talk about holistic athlete well-being as a performance enabler. Yesterday, like I mentioned earlier, we talked about the coach and the environment around the coach, what they need to learn, and the coach model. And I'm going to call back on stage Mr. Aaron Aslop, again, who is a lead of the high performance of the Organization of Sports Federation of Oceania. He's a sports consultant, experienced in sports diplomacy, policy, strategic planning, and national sports development, and high performance sports systems, holistic coach, and athlete performance.
athlete well-being, sports training and education, as well as facility development, operation and management. Now we're going to join this, the athlete's well-being, and whether together with the safeguarding, where do we meet, and where do we break the whole thing that is going around safeguarding and athlete's well-being?
Morning, everybody. I know that you've all been sitting there for a little while, and maybe the opportunity to give each other a high five or a hug just for being here. I know that you've had a really tough day in the last 24 hours in your country. So making the effort to be here, it's wonderful to see everyone that's here, smiling faces. So thank you again to KAS for this opportunity, and to yourselves for also making time to be here. I'm going to, if I can jump straight onto the presentation, guys. Yesterday, a few people commented, they said, oh, you made us think too much during my presentation around coaching. Today's not going to be any different. I'm going to be throwing some opportunities to you to reflect, some questions, because in the end, the information that I'm sharing here is really about an opportunity for you to consider this for the organisation or the sport that you work for, and I guess understanding the own context in which you are there. So we're going to talk about this concept, holistic athlete well-being, and then we're going to bring that concept into the area of how that enables performance. Okay, so it's going to be sort of a little bit of a two-part, but it's going to link. A couple of key messages that we're going to go through. And up front, please grab my contact details if you would love to talk further in depth about the content today, because the work that I'm going to show you here has been something that I've personally been doing across multiple emerging countries for over the past sort of 12, 13 years. So this is not something you're going to get in a 15, 20-minute presentation. Okay? My perspective. So what allows me to stand here to share my perspective about athlete well-being? I do come from Australia. I come from a country area, not a city boy. I'm a country boy. And I have, for the past 12 years, had the privilege to work in many developing countries in high-performance sport. So the context that I come from is athletes that I work with in countries where there's 80 to 85% unemployment. We're talking about people that live off less than $10 a day. We're talking about women and female athletes that suffer 60% of the population, domestic violence or sexual assault. I don't know what those stats relate to in your environment, but that's the environment that I come from. And that's the work that I've done with elite athletes that are in those environments. I lived in some countries where the riots that you had yesterday is almost a monthly occurrence with weapons. I see that challenges all the time, and we still have athletes that thrive in those environments because of the work that we've done. Okay? So I am not talking about theory here. I am talking about practice, that even in my role as an executive director, I get down into the mud every day with athletes dealing with these athlete wellbeing issues. I could tell you thousands of stories. So what I'm going to share about here today is not theory. It's based on evidence, but it's practically applied in multiple developing nation contexts. Okay? So here's a question for you to reflect on. Again, it's not here for you just to listen to me, it's for you to reflect and think about. Does your sport or program have an existing athlete wellbeing program? Yes or no? It's not, oh, maybe a little bit. No, it's either you do or we don't. And if you do, does that mean that you have full-time dedicated athlete wellbeing staff? So on Friday, KAS organised for me to meet with NOC and I ask them that question, what's their answer? Anyone want to guess? Take a guess. What do you reckon? No, they don't. Okay. Does your sport? We'll have a look. So why are we talking about athlete wellbeing? Why? Why is this important? When everyone in sport wants to talk about facilities, sports science, and everything else, why do we think wellbeing, athlete wellbeing, should be part of this conversation? It actually enables performance. Not only does it make people more holistically developed, doesn't just help them feel and function well, happier, it enables their performance. And an example recently was at the Continental Games that I worked at in Oceania. We surveyed our athletes across 30 different sports, hundreds of athletes. Every single one of them, 100% of those athletes, correlated performance outcome to their well-being. We're the only Pacific country that have full-time well-being staff. And we've got our record medal haul than we've ever had in history. Direct correlation, evidence, hard truth, it was there. The other thing that we want to look at is this holistic development perspective, but an ecological approach. I keep hearing the word ecosystems, but the elements of the ecosystem that I've met in the past few days show us that there's different layers of what we need to do for athlete wellbeing. I met with the minister 2 days ago. He wants this. So we're going to talk about how it may apply to you. So when you talk about why wellbeing, I guess we want to look at your perspective of what it is. Obviously, there's a lot of misconceptions. Unfortunately, around the world, we still don't have a universally defined definition of what wellbeing is, holistic wellbeing. There's not a single thing in literature that clearly defines what wellbeing is. Why? Because most researchers, and I'm not picking on you guys in the room, but they're scared to talk about culture and spiritual well-being because they're like, how do we measure that? Does that make sense? All right. So, have a think about what you maybe understand well-being is to be. And I would ask and encourage that you be a little bit open-minded about those terminology. And we're going to help you maybe define or be able to explain it. I've the word well-being, but when I ask people what you mean by that, they can't describe it. So let's have a look. In a nutshell, if you want to screenshot it, I'm happy to share this presentation. Here's how we define it. You are moving towards your whole person potential, and you're living your life in a valued and meaningful way. Do you notice how it says nothing to do with sport, being an athlete, winning? It's about you as a person. And the goal of an athlete wellbeing program is that the individual flourishes and thrives. Winning is a byproduct of thriving and flourishing. Are your young people right now thriving and flourishing? I saw it in the street yesterday. Are they? That's what we mean by well-being. And part of the goal is that they feel and function well. If you can't see at the bottom there, it says that they feel and function well. They have a lower rate or incident around the mental illness, mental ill health, and that they can rebound quicker when they get off track. They've got resilience. That's the goal. That's what we want. So if you're sitting in the room as a coach, do you want that for your athlete? Do you want them to be happy, feeling and functioning well? Do you want them to rebound when they get off track? And lower incident of their mental ill health. Does that make sense? Yeah? We probably want that for every person in the country, don't we? So here are some principles. For those of us that aren't sort of research-based stuff, that's okay, this might be a bit boring for you, but I want to show you that all the principles of what we teach around the wellbeing program is evidence-based. Who has seen the positive psychology framework? PERMA. Anyone seen it? Okay, go and check that out. That is a big part of what we look at. What it talks about, each of these, I'll put all four of them up. Who's heard of self-determination theory? Because all of you do it every day. Every single one of you in the room makes self-determination. Not unless you're a child, your parents determine things for you. As adults, we want to determine things for ourselves. Guess what? Athletes want to determine things for themselves. They don't like to be dictated to by coaches or administrators. Right? We want to be able to self-determine. But in order to do that, we need to help athletes to become competent in making those decisions. What we understand here is that our thoughts, our emotions or feelings and our behaviours are interlinked. I feel good, I think good, I behave good. Right? There's an interlink between those concepts. And the last thing that we do is that we focus on solutions. So when athletes come to me with problems, I immediately switch around to, so what can we do about it? Oh, my coach is doing this, so what are we going to do about it? I've got this issue at home, so what can we do about it? We don't want to delve into those problems. We want to look at solutions because we know through evidence that that leads to a more positive psychology outcome. And we measure how we track that. Is that okay? All right. So here's a bit of my IP I'm sharing. Every single organisation in sport will tell you that sport's based around these four things: technical, tactical, mental and physical. That's normal. What they don't do is the holistic area, which is where we include well-being and lifestyle. So if we truly want to develop our people, our athletes as people, our athletes as human beings, we need to consider a holistic approach. And I'm going to talk a little bit deeper about what this means. Does that make sense? So at the moment as coaches, we all do the technical, tactical, mental, physical. In developing the whole person. This last couple of days, I've met with athletes who have told me about areas of financial stress, family stress, relational stress, spiritual stress, cultural stress, career decisions, other health-related matters, so forth, all linked to their well-being. Right? They're not robots, they're human beings. So let's get a bit deeper. You guys have seen this. I presented this 4 years ago, just to let you know, at the first conference that we did. These four areas over here, so let me just quickly go through this model. The centre of the model is the athlete, the person. And what I do with the athlete is I do something called MVPs. I individually speak to the athlete and I ask them, tell me your meaning, your values, your purpose and strengths. And we have assessment tools that we use to help the athlete unpack those four areas. MVPs, meaning, values, purpose, strengths. Then I encourage the sport to create a performance culture around the athlete, which is the second part of the diagram. A values-based performance environment, which links to psychological safety and all these other things that we talk about. I can go into an organisation and see if well-being is present because I know if the environment has a performance culture, which means, does the environment feel safe? Is it welcoming? Is it inspiring? Because if they don't have that, they can't learn, grow and excel. Does that make sense? Okay. We have our 4 areas here. Let's get into the wellbeing space. Dual career. We focus on the dual career. There's a definition there, and underneath that we have 3 different wellbeing dimensions. We help the athletes understand education, career, business, whatever their interest may be. We help them manage their career in sport, and we give them financial literacy education. How many of your retired world champion athletes are living a normal life post-retirement? How many have taught them about budget, financial literacy, all of those different areas? It's a big part of what we call dual career. So imagine it like a train track. They've got their sporting career, but they have their business, study, whatever sort of career life they may have. The next area is we do a lot of personal development. No disrespect to parents, churches, schools, communities. We see a lot of elite athletes that are craving personal development, and we break that down into life skills, leadership skills, and their role in the community. Many athletes are pushed out there as role models into the community, but when you dig deeper, they haven't ever been trained in understanding what it is to be that role model. The next one is that we look at our beliefs and behaviour system. Spiritual, cultural, environment and their leisure. Particularly in our culture here, we have a spiritual life, we have a cultural life, we have a connection to community, we have a connection to environment. How many coaches or sport organisations are asking the athletes, how are you going in those spaces? Right? I'm not going to ask for hands up, but when you're going through those spiritual challenges in your life, cultural challenges, right? I've been at major championships and international events where we've had an athlete parent pass away in the middle of a tournament. How are you addressing that? How would you handle that? Right now we've got athletes heading to Paris in a couple of weeks. What happens to that young athlete if something back home here from a wellbeing factor is addressed? They're human beings, they're not robots. They're going to feel something. Right? Are we on board with that? Yeah. And then the last area that we look at is the medical sort of area, which is that biopsychosocial model. Our bodies, our mind, and our social beings. Right? I would suggest that the most significant challenges that most of our female athletes have problems with is relational issues. But how much time do we help them understand what safe, healthy, and unhealthy relationships look like? I spoke to the volleyball women's team last week. I said, how many of you have had the conversation with your partner, your husband, about you're going to be away for 6-7 weeks? How's that going? Had some really interesting conversations. And I'm a stranger. I'd never met them before. And in 2.5 hours, I got told a lot from them, direct to me. I said, how are you going to handle this? How are you addressing this? I don't know what to do. I just do it all the time because when I go to tournaments, it's just what we do. I try and fix it when I get back. That's not proactive, right? You want them to go over there and focus on a medal? And here they are, they've got their relationship stuff in the toilet back home. That's tough. Biological, the psychological element, the mental health piece, it's only a small bit. It's a small piece of what we look at. So, when we understand where you're at, what these little signs here might be is that you'd like to add on wellbeing into your program. The red cross sign there means you don't have anything in place. Some may actually have a place where they understand that wellbeing will enable performance, or you'd like to move in that direction. So where is your sport at? And then we'll talk a bit about this now here. Here's a vision of what I think wellbeing could be for your program. And we'll talk a bit about some of the challenges, but also I want to normalise it. If it is normal for an athlete, who agrees that every athlete should have a coach? Put your hand up. Do you agree it's normal to have a coach? Yes? Hands up? Yes? Why is it not normal to have a wellbeing support staff member there? If we know that evidence says the direct correlation between wellbeing and performance, where are our wellbeing staff? If we can employ sports scientists, S&C coaches, physios and everything else, but we're not taking care of the human element piece, I'll show you now that we will not sustain long-term performance. So here's a vision. We want to see that wellbeing is universally defined and it's normalised, meaning that it's just a normal part of every sports system. We want to help people understand that you can achieve both well-being and performance. If your only goal, your only KPI of a sport program is to win medals and you don't have a well-being outcome, that's the challenge. That's the piece that we've got to probably consider working on. How do we help systems adopt this holistic athlete approach? We want to help people recognise wellbeing as a performance enabler so they understand why they should invest in it. And here's my hope, my dream, that I deeply care about. I want athletes to be successful in sport, but I also want to see that they thrive in life. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. That's our dream. That's where we're going. I want to plant that vision in all our hearts because that's something I think we could really achieve. Here's a model that talks about what happens. So this is a scale: low performance, low well-being; high performance, high well-being. Do you want sustained success? Do you want not just success now, but always? We had the gentleman present on the first day talking about how we've had success in this sport and then it drops out after the next Olympics. I would bet my bottom dollar on it that it's because the well-being of the athletes in that program have not continued, and you cannot sustain high performance. I met our fellow para-athlete and we were talking about a number of factors that said everything to me, screaming that we've got a lot of athletes in that bottom corner who are high performers but low well-being, and they are distressed, totally distressed. You don't perform in your job every day or your family every day if you're distressed. You cannot sustain that high performance mindset for long. Do you agree? Yep. The other thing is I've seen a lot of people who are happy but they don't perform. You know those people? They're just happy, they float around, you've got some of them in your organisation. They're just happy being there, but when you look at the results, are they producing any results? Probably not. So how do we sustain high performance and high well-being? And we're going to give you a bit of a blueprint. All right? That's the goal. That's what we want, CEO. We want flourishing athletes. Yeah. Now, I'm going to skip through this only to tease you, maybe, that if you're interested, the model that I show here is actually part of a full ecological system that incorporates everything we do within the performance environments, the leadership system, and what we do around intelligence to feed into the system. So if you want to take anything away from this slide, on the left, what we say is that we all, not just coaches, everyone in the performance environment around the athlete has a responsibility to develop athletes in 8 domains. 4 sport performance domains, 4 wellbeing domains, and then we'd link that to the whole system. Okay? I'm going to flick through this, not to tease you, but just for the sake of time. So, how do you want to consider applying this for your sport or country? We have thousands upon thousands of athletes. So the program that we've developed allows you to either highly customise it or low customisation, run it for individuals or for groups. So our superstar para-athlete who's here, we would provide her a highly customised and a very individual program to meet her very specific needs. But there are other programs that we can deliver that are really highly customised, but they're available for bigger groups. Does that make sense? So we can take our curriculum and modify it to suit the individual need of the sport by sport or program by program. And here's a process around how we engage athletes, coaches and sports in establishing their own wellbeing program. This has come directly through the Wellbeing Science Institute. You have to create your own wellbeing strategy for your organisation. You have to define wellbeing and you have to create a model that's contextualised to your sport. We then do a briefing session with coaches and athletes so that, like today, they've learnt about what the wellbeing program would be. We then do a starting point with the athlete. So we actually help the athlete measure and identify their wellbeing status. We have a tool that helps you measure it now and how we actually support them developing that. In step 6, we have a wellbeing plan. A very specific plan. Every athlete has a plan around their training, but we don't have a plan for their wellbeing, and we can help them do that. Then obviously we look at the process around how we check in and follow up with people. It's a very simple process. You want more information on that, I'm happy to catch up with you individually, but that process we have now incorporated with over 250 different sport organisations across multiple countries. It's a similar principle-based process. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you. Asante.
Session, then we will take our break. Can you join us on stage again, Ms. Dorcas? Today, I think as she walks to stage, if you allow me, I'm going to just pick up from where Mr. Aaron has stopped. Can you help me with a microphone here? Please. I think I'm going to be very practical because you've shown us the holistic model, development model, but then again you have mentioned the number of institutions that you have visited in the short period that you've been in the country. You've been with the National Olympic Committee of Kenya, you've been with the Ministry of Sports, you spent time with the Kenya Academy of Sports, but where exactly do we start from? Because if you spent time with our athletes, the few minutes that you did, and they were freely opening up to you, then where exactly do we start so that we are able to now jumpstart this conversation on a higher level? Yeah, because there is something that we need to do to make sure that we balance the well-being and the practical sports itself.
Yeah, one of the organisations or groups that I haven't had a chance to meet with yet would be someone like the Athletes Commission as well. I really would love to get the perspective from them because ultimately they're there as the voice of the athlete. Now I'm not sure what sort of work they might do in this space or what sort of consultation process they go through with athletes as a review process annually or follow-up from the Olympics or other events. So I'm not sure what that type of work would be to get their perspective, but the engagement process I just showed at the end is a real practical way of how we can tangibly start that process. The big thing that we always do is lots of consultation processes with athletes. and maybe some people don't like the approach, but we love to connect with athletes in a confidential way where there's no administrators and coaches in the room sometimes. Because we've seen that athletes feel through, again, an environment that's not psychologically safe, that they can speak openly about the challenges that they're facing because they have fear of retribution of, am I going to get dropped if I say this? Is there going to be potentially a coach lose their job over some of the stuff that's happened, whatever it might be, but also because there's really personal matters. So we go through a lot of confidential process around feedback from athletes in that process, but that's when the wellbeing engagement step starts. We really connect with the athletes about using our measurement tool for them to highlight for us the areas against our model, what domain is really causing them to not feel or function well, and then we start to look at the solution immediately through a plan to say, this is how we're going to help you address that and support them through that process. So that's where we would be at.
All right, so that means there's a long-term and a short-term basis of it. I don't know whether we can have a short-term of this development model, because we've already just mentioned about what happens to them if they come forward and they feel afraid. It takes us to safeguarding. So she has a microphone. I think I'm going to connect to Dorcas, and he preempted my question. Then, how far have we? Last year we had you. You mentioned some of these processes. Your presentation, and you said we have over 9,000 guards already. How far have we come? And I know you've also given us the recommendations. But how will you gauge, are we going to the right direction? And also what Mr. Aaron has said, and how do we protect the fact that they are free to come forward to say their problems without necessarily jeopardizing their career?
Yeah, thank you for that question. With regards to safeguarding, last year came and I presented on gender, and a lot of the dynamics around safeguarding also related to gender. With regards to how far we have come, I think we have seen progress in terms of safeguarding, because internationally, I would say we have anchors, like for example federations. Most of them, like FIFA, have the FIFA guardians. I'm sure other federations have also a lot of pressure to develop safe environments for the athletes who participate in their programs. So the pressure is more international and trickling down. So what we need to be aware of is that we have a responsibility, again, as we say, to demand for these measures to be within our institutions, because as you know, as we if you're an athlete, you can always confidently ask your institution about safeguarding and recommend, especially online places where they can get. Of course, there's so much information online. In terms of reporting, that is where we still have a problem.
Yeah, that's very key.
Yes.
And very many cases that go unsolved as it is now.
Yes. We have a big problem in reporting. We still have a lot of stigma. We still have a lot of fear, just because of the power dynamics when it comes to issues of sexual harassment, defilement. But I think as the country opens up, we've seen in the other sectors, especially that are not very sport for development in this country, we have a lot of reporting, and that in itself should really attract people within the sport to know that there's recourse, especially when you have an incident, and you can actually get outside help if the frameworks within the institution of the sport that you participate in are not working.
All right, I wish we had athletes here other than us here to see whether this is really working, or how far we have gone and how free do they feel to come forward. If you have a question for Dorcas, kindly feel free before we take the break. I know we had a question with Professor Wycliffe. He's left the room. Yeah. If not, maybe I'll have a quick question as we wrap up with Aaron, just briefly. What's the short term? I know. Okay. okay, sometimes we make quick fix. We're headed to Paris. We also have other calendar events, events in the calendar. But how do we deal with the remainder of the year for the psychosocial well-being of the athletes as we head for Paris? Like, what would be the advice if you have any coach who has an athlete that is headed to Paris here?
Yeah, I reached out to a member of NOC last night, particularly because I just wanted to reach out as a friend to see how he was doing and how the team was doing because of what happened yesterday. I think there was a little bit of concern for some of the athletes and their families, and they couldn't break camp to get out and check on things, so I touched base with people there. The solution that's going to be happening is there's going to be a consultation process through KAS that'll go to the Minister of Sport, really about how do we incorporate wellbeing as a part of an overall high performance program for the country. So to the credit of the Minister and CEO at KAS and other organisations, they've considered that as a component of what we need to do. The reality is, I think we just, the stepping stone of not only developing that strategy, the key part is that we want to help identify and train wellbeing practitioners that we can equip with the right knowledge to be able to then implement such a program as what we've shown. So solutions can start today. It's that quick and straightforward because we have that ready built-in process to be able to measure and assess, put in the wellbeing plan and start those actions. So that's really about where we're at. We've got a two-pronged approach. Let's get real pragmatic and practical, get started there, but we also need to then look at how the overall system and strategy can implement this.
All right, so it's just taking advantage of the short-term and long-term goals.
I have a question for Aaron.
Yeah, but quickly, kindly. Yeah, briefly, Aaron.
My question is regarding, you're talking about high performance athletes, and some of these athletes belong to clubs. How do you see that model trickling down?
Yeah, so in the presentation I showed the engagement process. We don't hide that IP from anybody. When we do the engagement process and the debriefing part, we connect with every layers of the ecological system, meaning all the way from administration, senior board members, right the way, like corporate sponsors, family members, if they want to bring the husband and wives into that debrief process, we take that whole approach because of how connected the system is. And then obviously that's where we talked about the other model, which is the high customisation, low customisation individual group. There's quite a lot of the education program that can be rolled out in larger groups to incorporate that knowledge share piece as well.
Our presenters today, we appreciate it. If you really need that information, reach out to them. Get the presentations to your email. We will, you're able to constantly refer to them later. So right now we will take a break, a health break. We will head to have our tea. Kindly let us strictly make it 15 minutes. We have online presentations that are coming up and you need to really, really be on time. Will you kindly promise me that? Yes? Hey, now, I'm a ninja. Yes. Yes? We can do that in 15 minutes, right? See you in 15 minutes.